My apartment is like a shoebox, cramped with a low ceiling and yellowish stains from an old leak. I've lived here for 4 years, ever since I sold Evelyn's house to pay the last of her medical bills. Sometimes I feel like the walls are shrinking, especially in the evenings when the silence becomes unbearable. I sit at the kitchen table and go through the bills, organizing them into two stacks, those that can be paid now and those that will have to be put off until the next retirement. The second stack is always higher. My construction skills are no longer enough to find a decent job. Who needs a 67-year-old man with arthritis and a bad back? I do some minor repairs for my neighbors from time to time, but it's only enough for the bare necessities. The phone rings, breaking the silence, making me wince. My son's name pops up on the screen. "Hi, Nathan," I answered, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "Dad," his tone is businesslike and detached. "Violet and I have decided to invite you to Thanksgiving. We're having it at our house this year, and Violet's parents and a few other people are coming." I don't say anything for a second, trying to hide my surprise. I wasn't usually invited to family gatherings. The last one was Christmas 2 years ago, and Violet had defiantly not spoken to me all evening. "I didn't expect an invitation," I said honestly. "Violet thinks family should gather around the holidays." I could hear the tension in his voice. "Will you come?" "Sure," I say. "What time?" 4 o'clock. "And Dad," he pauses, "try to look, decent." I look down at my worn jeans and my worn-out shirt. "Don't worry, son. I won't embarrass your beautiful family." Nathan sighs. "I didn't mean it like that. It's just that Violet invited her relatives, and they're a certain kind of people." "I understand," I said. "I'll wear my best tie." "Okay," he says quickly, clearly wanting to end the conversation. "I'll see you Thursday then." The connection goes dead. I sit staring at the faded screen, thinking that my son, my only child, has become a complete stranger. We were once close. I taught him how to hammer nails, fix wiring, take apart a carburetor. Nathan loved spending time in the garage with me. Then he went to college, met Violet from the wealthy Prescott family, and everything changed. My son chose a different life where there was no room for a construction worker. Evelyn was better at it. She always found the right words, knew how to smooth over sharp edges. After she died, the gap between me and my son became unbridgeable. I see him once every few months, and each meeting turns into an awkward exchange of catchphrases. My grandchildren, Liam and Penelope, I see even less. Violet thinks I'm a bad influence on them with my plain manners. 8-year-old Liam still remembers me, but 5-year-old Penelope looks at me warily, as if I'm a stranger. I put the bills away in my desk drawer and walk to the window. Outside the window is a bleak November landscape, bare trees, gray sky. Hutchinson has never been a pretty town, but our neighborhood is especially dreary. Shabby high-rises, abandoned garages, trash on the curb. The contrast with the well-kept suburb where Nathan lives is stark. There's a knock at the door, unexpected for this time of day. I rarely get visitors. When I open the door, I see a thin man with glasses and a neatly trimmed graying beard. He is wearing a strict suit, holding a leather briefcase. He looks like a tax inspector or an insurance agent. "Francis Holbrook?" he asks. "Frank," I correct him. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Thomas Lynn, and I represent the law firm of Lynn and Associates. May I come in? I have some important information for you." I hesitantly let him into the apartment, mentally going over the unpaid bills. Has someone decided to sue me? Thomas Lynn looks around my humble surroundings, but his face remains impassive. He walks over to his desk and opens his briefcase. "Mr. Holbrook, I've been looking for you for weeks. You're pretty hard to find." "I haven't disappeared," I shrug. "I've lived here for 4 years. "Yeah, but you're not on social media. Your phone number's changed and your directory assistance is out of date." "Why were you looking for me?" "I ask you straight out." Thomas Lynn pulls a file from his briefcase. "It's about your brother, Howard Holbrook." I feel my heart clench. Howard. We haven't spoken in over 20 years. "What's wrong with him?" My voice sounds hoarse. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holbrook, but your brother passed away 3 months ago. Heart attack." I sink slowly into the chair. Howard's dead. My little brother, the one we grew up in the same house with, shared a room with, built shawls together, and fished for frogs in the pond outside of town. Howard, who stole my fiancée and then the money from the family business. Howard, who I swore I'd never see again. I'm so sorry for your loss, the lawyer said. I realize this is shocking news. We haven't spoken in a long time, I reply. Yes, your brother mentioned the disagreement between you. However, he pauses, Howard Holbrook has appointed you as his sole heir. I stare at him, not sure what he's saying. Heir? Howard left me something? Howard Holbrook was a successful real estate investor. After his divorce from Carol 20 years ago, he devoted himself full-time to the business. At the time of his death, his fortune was estimated at about $3 million, including real estate, investment accounts, and personal property. I feel the room begin to spin before my eyes. 3 million? I repeat myself. And he left it to me? Yes, Mr. Holbrook. All of your brother's property now belongs to you, including his house in Oak Ridge. It's an upscale neighborhood in Hutchinson, as you know. I know Oak Ridge. That's where Nathan and Violet live, a wealthy suburb with perfect lawns and homes for 7 figures. Why? Is the only thing I can ask. Why did he leave everything to me? Thomas Lynn pulls an envelope out of his briefcase. Your brother left this letter for you. I don't know the contents, it's sealed. I take the envelope. It has my name on it, written in Howard's familiar handwriting. My hands tremble as I open it. Dear Frank, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm gone. I hope you can forgive me at least after I'm gone. I know I have hurt you, and there is nothing I can do to make it up to you. Carol left me after 2 years, taking half my money. I guess you could call it karma. I tried to contact you many times, but you changed your number and moved away. I've watched your life from afar. I know about Evelyn's illness, how you sold your house to pay for her treatment. I wanted to help then, but I realized you'd rather die than accept money from me. I hope this inheritance will help you live the rest of your life with dignity. You were always the better of the two of us, Frank. I missed you every day. Your brother, Howard. I fold the letter and am silent for a long time. Images of the past flash before my eyes. Howard, the skinny freckled boy, laughing at my jokes. Howard kissing my fiancée Carol in the backyard of our house. Howard driving away in my car with a suitcase full of money from the safe of our family construction company. Mr. Holbrook? The lawyer's voice brings me back to reality. You need to sign some papers to start the probate process. It'll take some time, but I'll try to expedite the formalities. How long will it take? I ask, still stunned. Usually 1 to 3 months, but given that you are the sole heir and there are no disputes, we can do it faster. Perhaps by the end of next week, you could have access to the main accounts in real estate. I nod, trying to comprehend what's happened. $3 million. A house in Oak Ridge. I, Frank Holbrook, who yesterday was counting pennies to buy bread before retirement, am now a millionaire. Does anyone know about this? About the inheritance? Just me and my partner who handled your brother's affairs. Howard Holbrook was a very secretive man, especially in recent years. I want this to remain confidential, I say, at least for now. Of course, Mr. Holbrook, confidentiality is the basis of our work. Thomas Lynn explains to me the details of the process, gives me a few documents to sign, and leaves his card. I'll be in touch, Mr. Holbrook. If you have any questions, call me anytime. When the door closes behind the lawyer, I stand in the middle of the room for a long time, not knowing what to do. My thoughts are jumbled. I reread Howard's letter again. Could this be some kind of mistake or a cruel joke? I think back to Nathan's invitation to Thanksgiving. I'm not usually invited to family holidays. Violet always finds a reason not to. What's different now? I walk to my closet and pull out the only decent suit I bought 5 years ago for Evelyn's funeral. It's hanging baggy. I've lost a lot of weight over the years. I have to look presentable for Thanksgiving, or Violet will look at me with ill-concealed disgust again. I decide I'm not going to tell my son about the inheritance, at least not until the paperwork's done, or maybe not even then. I want to see how they feel about me when they think I'm still the same penniless old man living on a pension in a shabby apartment. After all, it will only be one night. I'll endure a few hours of condescending stares and fake smiles, and then my life will change forever. Thanksgiving morning greeted me with overcast skies and drizzling rain. I woke up early, even though it was more than 8 hours before my visit with Nathan. Sleep had eluded me all night. Thoughts of Howard's inheritance and the upcoming meeting with my son's family kept me awake. After drinking a cup of instant coffee, I pulled out an old box I'd kept in the closet. It contained family photos, letters, postcards, everything that remained from my former life. At the top was a shabby picture of Howard and me, both of us in work overalls with the Holbrook & Sons logo on them, standing in front of a newly built house. 1982, we were 24 and 21 at the time. Dad was proud of us that day. The family business continued. As I paged through the photos, the past came in waves. There's Howard and my fiancée Carol at the picnic. I didn't notice the looks they exchanged back then. I was too involved in the business, spending days at a construction site while my brother was doing the books, what he called sitting in the company office. I didn't realize that all this time he was not only manipulating numbers, but also meeting with Carol behind my back. The pictures ended in '87. That's when it all came crashing down. I caught them together in our house, in our bed. 2 weeks later, Howard emptied the company accounts and disappeared with Carol. $60,000, the entire savings of the family business. Father didn't survive the blow. A heart attack took him 6 months later. Mother survived another 5 years, but never recovered from the betrayal of her youngest son. And I met Evelyn, a kind, understanding nurse who came to work at the hospice where my mother was lying. She helped me through that difficult period, to rebuild the company, to start life anew. A year later, we were married, and 2 more years later, Nathan was born. I put the pictures back in the box. If only Evelyn were alive. She'd know what to do with this unexpected inheritance, how to fix things with her son. She always found the right words. The phone rang, interrupting my memories. Thomas Lynn's name came up on the screen. "Good morning, Mr. Holbrook," the lawyer said. "I hope it's not too early." "No, I've been up for a long time." "Good, I've got good news. We can speed things up. I've contacted your brother's bank, and they're ready to give you access to his main account on Monday. It's about $800,000. The other assets will take longer, but it's a start." I sat down, trying to comprehend what I was hearing. $800,000. Monday. "Thank you, Mr. Lynn. That's, unexpectedly fast. You don't want to take too long on a case like this? I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday. All you have to do is show up at the bank's office at 10 a.m. and sign them. After that, the account will be all yours." We discussed the details and I hung up the phone, feeling strangely numb. $800,000 on Monday, a sum I couldn't have even dreamed of until 2 days ago. I spent the rest of the morning tidying myself up. I ironed my old suit, shined my only decent shoes, trimmed my graying beard. An older man with deep wrinkles and tired eyes looked back at me from the mirror. I reminded myself of a character from those movies where poor relatives come to a rich house and embarrass the owners with their appearance. The thought of the money that would soon be at my disposal gave me a strange feeling. I felt no joy or relief, only regret that this money had not come 5 years earlier, when it could have saved Evelyn. The latest treatments, the best doctors, maybe she would be alive now. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I hailed a cab. Taking the bus to Oak Ridge on Thanksgiving meant taking 3 transfers and being late for the holiday. I could afford that small luxury. As the cab winded through the streets of Hutchinson, I watched the city change before my eyes. Shabby houses were replaced by neat cottages, and then luxurious mansions behind high fences. Oak Ridge was a different world. People lived here for whom my monthly pension was the amount they spent on one meal in a restaurant. "Here we are," the cabbie announced, stopping in front of a 2-story red brick house with immaculately trimmed bushes and a festive wreath on the door. I paid, adding a generous tip. The driver looked at me in surprise but said nothing. Taking a deep breath, I headed for the entrance, clutching a bag with 2 bottles of inexpensive wine in my hand, all I could afford as a gift. The door was opened by Violet, a slender woman with flawless makeup and a cold smile. She was wearing an elegant burgundy dress and a pearl necklace that I was sure cost as much as my apartment for a year. "Frank," she nodded, not offering to come in right away. "You're accurate." "Hello, Violet." I handed her the package. "Happy Thanksgiving." She took the package with 2 fingers, like something unpleasant. "Thank you. Come on in. Everyone's getting ready." I walked into a spacious hallway with marble floors and mirrored walls. Nathan's house always made me feel clumsy. There were too many fragile, expensive things, too much space filled with designer furniture and modern art. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room. I followed Violet in, noting the way she kept her distance, as if she was afraid I'd soil her with my presence. About 15 people were gathered in the living room. Violet's parents, her sister and her husband, a few other relatives and family friends. Everyone was dressed like they were at a dinner party, not a family reunion. Nathan came up to meet me, tall, trim, neatly cut, and wearing an expensive sweater. My son had inherited my height and build, but otherwise he was the complete opposite: groomed, refined, always impeccably dressed. "Dad," he hugged me discreetly, "I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for the invitation." I tried to speak calmly, though my heart was pounding with excitement. "Where are my grandchildren?" "They're upstairs playing in the playroom," Nathan said. "They will be downstairs for dinner. Let me introduce you to our guests." The next 15 minutes were a series of awkward introductions. Violet's parents, Gregory and Beatrice Prescott, barely acknowledged me with a nod. Violet's sister, Olivia, and her husband, Curtis, were a little more welcoming, but their smiles didn't reach my eyes. The rest of the guests looked at me with ill-concealed curiosity. Violet was probably telling them about her beggar father-in-law. "Frank worked in construction," Nathan explained to one of the guests, as if apologizing for me. "Oh, that's interesting," the man in the suit, which was clearly worth as much as my monthly pension, replied. "And what projects have you realized?" "Mostly residential," I replied. "Our family company built over 200 homes in Hutchinson and the surrounding area." "You had your own company?" There was surprise in his voice. "Holbrook and Sons," I nodded. "We were in business from 1957 to 2015. "What happened then?" the man asked. I wanted to answer, but Violet interrupted. "Walter, let me introduce you to my cousins from Chicago." She deftly led the man to another part of the room. I was left alone with a glass of apple cider. I'd refused the wine, noticing Nathan's displeased look. Watching the guests, I felt like an alien who'd accidentally walked into an earthly party. They talked about things that were foreign to me: investments, country clubs, private schools, traveling to exotic countries. I was reminded of our family holidays when my father was alive. We would gather in an old house outside the city, sit down at a large wooden table, eat simple but delicious food, talk about work, neighbors, plans for the future. No show, no pretense. "Grandpa," a child's voice suddenly sounded, and 8-year-old Liam ran up to me. "You came!" I crouched down to hug my grandson. Behind him, holding onto the stair rail, Penelope was coming down, looking at me warily. "Hello, Liam," I smiled, feeling the ice in my chest melt. "How you've grown." "My mom said you'd come, but I didn't believe it," Liam said quickly, choking on his words. "You never come to the holidays." "This time I was invited." I ruffled his hair. "Hello, Penelope," I said to my granddaughter, who came closer, but still kept her distance. "Hello," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on me. "Grandpa, did you bring us presents?" Liam asked. "Liam," Violet, who'd suddenly appeared next to him, called out sharply. "That's no way to ask. Go wash your hands. We'll be at the table soon." The children ran off, and Violet turned to me. "I'm sorry about Liam. He hasn't learned his manners yet." "It's okay," I said. "He's just a kid. At his age, he should know that begging for gifts is unseemly," she said with steel in her voice, "especially when the man can barely afford a cab ride." I stayed silent, though I was seething inside. If she knew that in a few days I'd have $800,000, but I wasn't going to talk about it. Not yet. "Everyone to the table, please," Nathan announced, and the guests filed into the dining room. The table was set with impeccable taste: snow-white tablecloths, porcelain plates with a gold border, crystal glasses, silverware. In the center was a traditional turkey, perfectly roasted and decorated with sprigs of rosemary. I got a seat at the far end of the table, between two unfamiliar guests who hadn't addressed me once during the entire dinner. The children sat next to Violet, at the opposite end of the table from me. Gregory Prescott, Violet's father, said a long prayer, thanking God for prosperity and success. Then Nathan raised his glass and proposed a toast to the family and friends gathered around the table. "And to those who could not attend," he added, glancing in my direction. I realized he meant his mother. The dinner was exquisite. The turkey melted in my mouth. The sauces complemented the flavors perfectly. The vegetables were cooked the way they were served in expensive restaurants. But I could barely taste the food. My thoughts swirled around Howard's inheritance, around how my life would change once I had access to the money. Would I be able to rebuild my relationship with my son, or would the money only complicate things? Nathan married Violet when he was still a student, and her parents helped him with his first job at an insurance company. They paid the down payment on this house. I could never compete financially with the Prescotts, but that would change now. The conversation at the table flowed around politics, the stock market, and the latest fashions. I remained silent, not having much to say on these topics. "What do you do in retirement, Mr. Holbrook?" Violet's sister Olivia suddenly asked me. She sounded fake curiosity. "Fixing things," I answered. "I have golden hands," as my wife used to say. "That's nice," she smiled indulgently. "Nathan told me you lived modest." "Very modest," Violet interjected. "Frank lives in a neighborhood where decent people are afraid to go after dark." A chuckle rippled across the table. I gripped my fork tighter, feeling the color flood my face. "My neighborhood isn't so bad," I said calmly. "The people there are simple but honest." "Oh yes, salt of the earth," Violet's father said sarcastically. "I wonder how often you are robbed there." "Not once," I answered. "Perhaps because I have nothing to steal." Again they laughed. Nathan looked embarrassed, but did not interfere. My son had always cared more about Violet's opinion than mine. "Grandpa, is it true that you know how to build houses?" Liam asked suddenly, interrupting the adults. "It's true," I smiled at my grandson. "I've built many houses in this town. Maybe even this one." "I don't think so," Violet hummed. "This house was built by a company called Premium Homes. Founded by my former assistant, Reginald Foster," I said. "He studied with me for 10 years before he started his own business." Violet was silent, clearly not expecting that answer. "Can you build a house for my toys?" Liam persisted. "Of course I can," I nodded. "As soon as your parents invite me over again." "Liam, don't bother Grandpa," Violet interjected. "He must have other things on his mind." "Like what?" I couldn't take it anymore. "What do you think would occupy the time of a penniless pensioner?" There was silence at the table. Violet blushed, then turned pale. "That's not what I meant," she said through gritted teeth. "Of course not," I smiled without warmth. "You're just looking out for me. You always do." Nathan cleared his throat. "Who wants dessert?" Violet made an amazing pumpkin pie. The conversation changed direction, but the atmosphere at the table became even more tense. I could feel Violet glaring at me, and her parents were whispering, casting disapproving glances in my direction. After dessert, everyone moved into the living room, where Nathan turned on a soccer game on the huge TV. The men gathered around the screen, the women forming a separate group by the fireplace. I was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. I stepped out onto the terrace for some fresh air. The day was drawing towards evening, and the ornamental lanterns in the garden were already lit. The pool, covered with a tarpaulin for the winter, looked like a dark spot in the manicured landscape. Soon Liam and Penelope ran out onto the terrace, followed by several other children, apparently belonging to other guests. "Grandpa, look what I can do!" Liam began to perform some elaborate dance trick. I watched my grandson with a smile, thinking about how little time we'd spent together over the years. If it weren't for Violet and her snobbery, if it weren't for Nathan's cowardice, I could be a real grandfather to these kids instead of an occasional guest in their lives. Thanksgiving night had passed the halfway point, but I still didn't feel the holiday spirit. After that unpleasant conversation at the table, Violet had been careful to pretend I didn't exist. She walked past me as if I were nothing, addressed the other guests over my head, and gave me one-word answers if I dared to ask. The other guests, feeling cold, also tried to stay away from me. Only the children who didn't understand adult conventions kept hanging around, especially Liam, who seemed pleased to see me. "Grandpa, do you know how to play video games?" he asked, running up to me with a tablet in his hands. "I'm afraid not," I smiled, glad for this island of sincerity in the midst of an ocean of falsity. "There were other games in my day." "Like what?" Liam sat down next to me on the couch, ignoring my mother's disapproving gaze. Your great-grandfather and my brother Howard and I used to make slingshots and shoot at cans, I answered. Or we'd build huts in the woods outside of town. And in the winter, we'd go sledding down the hill. Cool, Liam marveled. Can you make me a slingshot? Liam! Violet intervened sharply, suddenly materializing next to him. It's time to go upstairs. You and the rest of the kids need to prepare a performance for the grown-ups. But Mom, his grandson began to object. No buts, Violet cut him off, grabbing his arm. All the children are already upstairs. Let's go. She led Liam away without even a glance in my direction. I was alone on the couch, feeling like a leper at the party. Nathan, noticing the scene, came over and sat next to me. Don't mind Violet, he said quietly. She just had a hard day, cooking a lot. Of course, I nodded, not wanting to make a scene. The party was a success, and it was very elegant. Nathan looked at me carefully. You don't feel comfortable here, do you? I could have lied, but I decided to tell the truth. Yes, son, this is not my world. I know, he sighed, but this is my family, my life now. I wish you would accept that. I accept your choice, Nathan, but don't require me to pretend to be something I'm not. I put my hand on his shoulder. Do you remember when you and I built the birdhouse in the backyard? You were 6. Vaguely, he smiled. I remember hammering my finger in with a hammer and crying. And I told you that real men don't cry over little things like that. I shook my head. I was wrong. Everyone hurts sometimes, and it's okay to admit it. Nathan looked at me in surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to say that. Dad, He was interrupted by Gregory Prescott's loud voice. Nathan, come here, son. Walter wants to talk to you about that investment opportunity. My son flinched, gave me an apologetic look, and hurried over to his father-in-law. Son, the address cut me to the heart. Gregory Prescott treated my son as his own, and Nathan accepted it gratefully. After all, the Prescotts had done more for his career and well-being than I ever could. I stood up and headed toward the terrace exit. I needed fresh air and a moment of silence. Through the glass door, I could see Liam and the other kids playing by the pool under the supervision of some young woman, apparently a nanny. Violet was nowhere to be seen. The terrace was empty, and I was relieved to breathe in the cool November air. It was dark, but the garden was lit by decorative lanterns and lamps dotted around the perimeter of the property. Exquisite, like everything in this house. I walked over to the railing and looked at the pool. It was covered with a tarp for the winter, but the kids were playing nearby, carefully skirting the edge of it. Liam, spotting me, waved happily. Grandpa, look what I can do. He did some dance moves reminiscent of the ones shown in these modern video games. I smiled and gave him a thumbs up. At that moment, Violet came out onto the terrace, accompanied by her sister Olivia. When she saw me, she pursed her lips but came closer. Did you want something, Frank? She asked me with feigned politeness. I was just getting some air, I said. It's chilly out on the terrace, and you might catch cold, she said without a trace of concern in her voice. Thanks for your concern, but I'm hardened, I smiled. You have a beautiful garden. We spent more on landscaping than some people spend on housing in a year, Olivia said with the same condescending tone her sister used. I remained silent, not wanting to add to the fire of their snobbery. Grandfather, look, I learned how to do a cartwheel, shouted Liam, and he actually did a pretty nifty gymnastic exercise. Well done, grandson. I couldn't contain my pride. You're very capable. Liam, stop that right now, Violet said sharply. You'll stain the party clothes. But, Mommy, I want to show Grandpa. I said stop it, she said, her voice even harder. I walked down the steps from the terrace to the pool so I could be closer to my grandson. Liam, your mom's right about the clothes, I said conciliatory. But you're really good. Maybe someday I'll teach you how to make birdhouses like I taught your father. The boy's face brightened, but Violet, who had followed me downstairs, snorted. I don't think Liam could use that kind of country skills. He'll go to an Ivy League school and pursue a career in finance like his father. All skills are useful, I pointed out, and not all children are born for office work. Are you implying that my son isn't smart enough? Violet turned pale with anger. Not at all, I shook my head. I'm just saying that everyone has different talents. It's important to nurture them, not suppress them. Don't tell me how to raise my children, Violet hissed, losing her composure. You couldn't even raise your own son properly. If it weren't for my father, Nathan would still be working in a machine shop. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I took an involuntary step forward, too close to the edge of the pool. Don't you talk about my son like that. My voice shook with barely contained anger. He's a talented and intelligent man, and he would have succeeded anyway. Violet laughed, a cold, unpleasant laugh. In any case, in your world, success is having your own room in the nursing home, or maybe a lack of utility debt. She came even closer. Face it, Frank, you're a loser who couldn't afford a decent old age. And if it weren't for my family, Nathan would be like you. I stood there stunned by her words, unable to find an answer. At that moment, Liam ran up to me and tugged on my arm. Grandpa, come on, I'll show you my toys. Liam, get away from Grandpa, Violet ordered. But Mom, I said, get away. She grabbed her son's shoulder and pulled him away from her, with such force that he shrieked. Don't do that to him. I made an instinctive movement to protect my grandson. It was at that moment that Violet pushed me in the chest with both hands. It was sudden and hard. I lost my balance and fell backward into the pool, ripping through the tarp. The cold water burned like fire. The November water in the pool was icy cold. Apparently the heating system had been turned off for the winter. I floundered, trying to get out from under the heavy tarp that enveloped me like a shroud. My ears were filled with the sound of water mixed with children's screams and adults' laughter. Finally, I managed to free myself and rise to the surface, gulping for air. I saw Liam's frightened face, the stunned looks of the other kids, and Violet laughing, standing there with her hand over her mouth, embarrassed but not remorseful. Oh my God, what an embarrassment, she exclaimed theatrically. Frank, you're so embarrassing. I tried to get out of the pool, but the edge was high and my wet clothes were dragging me down. By then, the other guests had come running to the noise and were now standing in a semicircle, watching my humiliation. Somebody help him out, someone said. Nathan pushed through the crowd, his face pale with shock. Dad, what happened? Your father lost his balance and fell into the pool, Violet answered quickly. He must have had too much to drink. I wasn't drinking. I was indignant, clinging to the edge of the pool. Your wife pushed me. Violet rolled her eyes dramatically. Of course she did. Me, a 55-pound woman, pushing a grown man into the pool. Very believable. There was laughter among the guests. I looked at my son for support, but all I saw was confusion and doubt in his eyes. Nathan, help me out, I asked. My son reached out and helped me out of the pool. I stood in front of the guests, drenched, shivering, with gray hair sticking to my forehead, in a suit that now looked like a wet rag. Oh, you poor thing, Olivia said in a faintly sympathetic tone. You need a change of clothes. He doesn't have any dry clothes with him, Violet said, and I don't think anything in Nathan's closet will fit in style. A new wave of laughter rippled through the guests. I stood there feeling the water running down my face, mixing with the hot tears of humiliation I was trying to hold back. Nathan, Violet turned to my son, maybe your father would like to go home. He's soaking wet and he needs a change of clothes. Besides, the party is almost over. I looked at my son, expecting him to object, to offer me clothes, to give me a towel, to show some concern. But Nathan just shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly wishing the unpleasant incident would be forgotten and his wet, inappropriate father out of sight. I'll call you a cab, Dad, he finally said, avoiding looking me in the eye. Don't bother, my voice sounded unexpectedly firm. I'll be fine on my own. I headed for the exit, leaving wet footprints on the marble floor of the hallway. There were muffled comments and chuckles behind me. Wait, Violet's voice suddenly sounded. I turned around. She was standing at the entrance to the living room, staring at me arrogantly. You forgot your coat. She nodded at the coat rack by the door. I silently took my old coat, realizing it wouldn't keep me out of the cold. The thin fabric would get wet in the first minute. And Frank, Violet added, and something evil flashed in her eyes. The next time you decide to come to a family party, remember, beggar, this party is not for you. Her words hit me like a whip. There was laughter behind me. It seemed to be Violet's father and a few other guests. I turned around and saw Nathan standing with his head down, not daring to stand up for his father. "Violet, that's enough," he said softly, but there was no strength in his voice, only weariness. "No, it's not enough," she cut him off. "I've been putting up with this loser at family events for years. Enough. He embarrasses us in front of our friends, ruins holidays, gives the kids ridiculous advice. I'm sick of it. Dad, maybe you really should leave," Nathan said finally, still not looking me in the eye. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do today. We'll talk tomorrow." I looked at my son, the man I had raised, the man I had taught to be honest and brave, to protect the weak and stand up for the truth. And I saw a coward who feared his wife and her rich family more than his own conscience. "Okay, Nathan," I put on my wet coat. "I'm leaving. But remember, once you betray your father, you may lose him forever." I walked out of the house shivering with cold and humiliation. The November wind whipped through my wet clothes. I pulled out my phone to call a cab, but the screen was unresponsive. Apparently, the water had damaged it. I walked down the street, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do next. My thoughts were jumbled, but one thing became brighter and clearer. They would pay for this humiliation. All of them. I thought of Howard's inheritance, of the $800,000 that would be at my disposal on Monday, of the house in Oak Ridge and the investment accounts, the opportunities I now have. Yes, they'll know who they humiliated today. I'll teach them a lesson they'll never forget. The drive back home seemed endless. I was shaking from the cold in the cab I'd managed to hail only half an hour after I'd left Nathan's house. The driver squinted at me in the rearview mirror. It wasn't every day he got a drenched old man who smelled like chlorine from a swimming pool. "Did you fall?" he finally asked, unable to stand the tense silence. "No," I answered dryly. "I was pushed." The driver chuckled, but didn't ask any more questions. I stared out the window at the houses whizzing by, and the rage inside me was slowly building. Not hot, impulsive anger, but cold, calculating hatred. I had been humiliated. My own son hadn't stood up for me. Violet treated me like dirt underfoot, and they would have to pay for it all. Finally, the cab stopped outside my shabby apartment building. I paid, leaving a generous tip, the last money before sudden wealth, and went up to my apartment. I took off my wet clothes and stood under the hot shower for a long time, trying to warm up. My thoughts swirled in my head like autumn leaves in the wind. The visit to my son had turned into a nightmare that I couldn't imagine even in the bleakest predictions. "Beggar, this holiday is not for you." Violet's words echoed in my ears, mingling with the laughter of the guests and Nathan's silent betrayal. I got out of the shower and put on an old but clean tracksuit and thick socks. The apartment was cool. The heating was barely working, but after the icy pool, even that temperature felt like a blessing. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out Thomas Lynn's business card. It was about 7 p.m. now. The lawyer was probably home with his family by now. I almost put the card back in my pocket, but anger and the desire for revenge overrode politeness. I dialed the number. "Thomas Lynn speaking," the lawyer answered after the third dial tone. "Mr. Lynn, this is Frank Holbrook." My voice sounded hoarse. "I apologize for disturbing you on a holiday, but I have an urgent matter." "Mr. Holbrook," he sounded surprised. "What's wrong? I need your help. Today. Right now." I took a deep breath. "It's about my brother's inheritance." "But it's Thanksgiving," the lawyer said uncertainly. "My office is closed. All the documents." "I don't need all the documents," I interrupted. "Just the ones that prove my right to inherit. And I need you to come with me." There was a pause. I could hear music and children laughing in the background. Apparently Thomas Lynn was celebrating with his family. "Mr. Holbrook, can't this wait until tomorrow?" he suggested cautiously. "No," I replied firmly. "It can't wait. I'll pay you 3 times your normal rate for an emergency call on a holiday." A pause again, then a sigh. "All right, Mr. Holbrook, but I must warn you that I only have copies of the basic documents at home. If you need originals or something specific—" "Copies are fine," I assured him. "I just need you to confirm my right to inherit officially as a lawyer. And I also want you to come with me to my son." "Your son?" The lawyer sounded surprised. "Why?" "I'll explain when we meet. I didn't want to go into details over the phone. How soon can you get here?" Thomas Lynn hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. I can be there in 45 minutes. I need to gather the documents and explain to the family. Thank you, Mr. Lynn. I felt something resembling satisfaction for the first time all evening. I'll be waiting. Hanging up the phone, I began to get ready. The first thing I had to do was clean myself up. If I was going to teach my son's family a lesson, I had to look good. I shaved, neatly trimmed my beard, and styled my hair. Then I put on my second suit, an old but good quality one, bought when Evelyn was alive for some family celebration. The suit hung on me, but still looked better than my everyday attire. Looking in the mirror, I remembered the hurtful words of Violet and her relatives. They considered me a loser who couldn't provide for a decent old age. Yesterday they were right. But things have changed. Howard, my brother, had given me a second chance, and I wasn't about to pass it up. The doorbell rang exactly 45 minutes later. Thomas Lynn stood on the doorstep with a leather briefcase in his hands. He was dressed in a strict dark suit, as if he were going to the office rather than being plucked from a family holiday. Come in, Mr. Lynn. I gestured him into the apartment. The lawyer entered, taking a quick glance around my humble abode. There was no emotion on his face. A real professional. So, Mr. Holbrook, he sat down at the table, opening his briefcase. You wanted to discuss your brother's inheritance. What exactly are you interested in? I sat down across from him and began to explain. I was at my son's Thanksgiving party today. There was an unpleasant incident. I briefly recounted the incident, omitting the emotional details but not hiding the facts. The lawyer's face remained impassive, only his eyebrows raised slightly when I got to the point about the pool. I understand, he nodded when I finished. And now you want to... I want to go back there, I said firmly. With you, the official representative who will confirm my right to my brother's inheritance. I want them to know that the man they humiliated is now a millionaire. Thomas Lynn tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Mr. Holbrook, I understand your desire for justice, but as your lawyer, I must advise you to weigh the consequences. Such a dramatic disclosure could complicate your future relationship with your son. What relationship? I grinned bitterly. Have you seen my apartment? Do you know how many times my son has visited me here in the last year? Not one. He's ashamed of me, of his father, and his wife openly despises me. Today they showed their true colors, and I want to show mine. The lawyer sighed. All right, Mr. Holbrook, I'll go with you since you're my client. But let me give you a word of advice. Try to keep your emotions in check. Your goal is to convey information, not to exacerbate conflict. I nodded, though I was seething inside. Thomas Lynn didn't understand. He wasn't standing wet, shivering with cold and humiliation in front of laughing rich snobs. Hadn't heard Violet's scornful words. Didn't see his own son turned away without defense. I have with me copies of the will and the deeds to the property, the lawyer continued, pulling out the papers. They confirm your right to the inheritance and its approximate value. This should be sufficient for your defiant return. He spread the papers out on the table, explaining the significance of each one. I listened, half listening, pondering the confrontation to come. How would Nathan react when he found out about the inheritance? Would Violet still look at me with contempt when she realized I was richer than her parents? And the guests laughing at the wet old man? What will they think? Mr. Holbrook, are you listening to me? The lawyer's voice brought me back to reality. Yes, of course, I nodded. I'm sorry, I was thinking. I told you that these documents prove your right to the real estate in Oak Ridge. He pointed to one of the sheets. Your brother's house is at 23 Pine Street. It's an upscale neighborhood, worth about $1,400,000. I froze. Pine Street, 23? Are you sure? Absolutely. Lynn showed me the deed. Here, see for yourself. I felt a chill run down my spine. 23 Pine Street was only 3 blocks from Nathan's house. My brother lived almost next door to my son, and neither of them probably knew it. Ironic, I muttered. Excuse me? Nothing, I shook my head. Continue, please. Thomas Lynn showed me the rest of the documents. The bank accounts, the investment portfolio, even the collection of rare coins Howard had amassed. The total inheritance was indeed approaching $3 million. If you have any questions, the lawyer began. Just one, I interrupted. Are you ready to go right now? He looked at his watch. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. Are you sure they're still celebrating? I'm sure, I nodded. Violet has these events that go on late into the night. She likes to impress her guests. Good. Thomas Lynn folded the documents neatly back into his briefcase. But let me caution you once again not to act hastily. Perhaps you should cool down a bit and think about the situation. I've thought it over enough, I replied firmly, and I'm not going to delay. They humiliated me today by treating me like an old beggar. Let them find out the truth. The lawyer sighed but didn't argue. He put the last document in his briefcase and stood up. Where are we going? I asked, putting on my coat. I have a car downstairs, Lynn answered. We walked down the shabby stairs of the entrance. At the entrance was a black Mercedes, not the latest model, but still looking inappropriately luxurious against the backdrop of my neighborhood. The lawyer opened the passenger door for me, then got behind the wheel. Your son's address? I gave him the address and the car started. We hardly spoke as we drove. Thomas Lynn seemed to be concentrating on driving, and I was thinking about the upcoming scene. What exactly would I say? How would I explain my return with the lawyer? Would I enjoy Violet's shock or maintain my dignity? 20 minutes later, we pulled into Oak Ridge. Manicured streets, opulent homes, immaculate lawns, the epitome of the American dream that had always remained elusive to me, until now. That house over there, with the blue door, I pointed to Nathan's mansion, which still had several expensive cars parked in front of it, so the guests hadn't left. Thomas Lynn had parked the Mercedes right in front of the entrance. I noticed the curtain in one of the windows twitching. Someone had noticed our arrival. Last chance to change your mind, Mr. Holbrook, the lawyer said, turning off the engine. I shook my head. No, it was time for justice. We got out of the car and headed for the front door. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Not from fear, but from anticipation. Now they would find out who had really been humiliated, who they'd put out on the street soaking wet and freezing. I pressed the doorbell and heard a melodic chime inside the house. A few seconds later, the door opened and Nathan appeared on the doorstep. When he saw me, he froze with a look of shock on his face. Dad! His voice was barely audible. What are you doing here? Hello, son, I smiled, trying to remain calm. I'm back, and I brought Mr. Lynn, my lawyer. We have important news for your whole family. Nathan looked from me to Thomas Lynn, who nodded discreetly in greeting. A lawyer, my son repeated in bewilderment. Why, what are you talking about? Can we come in? I asked calmly. Or would you rather have your father on your doorstep for the second time today? The words clearly hurt Nathan. He stepped back awkwardly, letting us into the house. Sure, come on in. But Dad, if this is some kind of, I don't know, revenge for tonight. Not revenge, Nathan, I shook my head. Just the truth that everyone needs to know, especially your wife. We walked into the hallway and I heard voices coming from the living room. There were still guests gathered there, laughing, talking, probably discussing the recent incident with the ridiculous old man in the pool. Who is it, darling? Violet's voice sounded, and a moment later she appeared in the living room doorway. When she saw me, she froze like a thunderclap. You! What are you doing here? Her tone was full of indignation and contempt, but I saw a glimmer of alarm in her eyes. She had not expected my return and did not know what to do. Good evening, Violet, I smiled. I decided to come back to finish our conversation, and I brought Mr. Lynn, my lawyer. I pointed to Thomas Lynn, who was standing next to me holding a briefcase. Lawyer? She laughed nervously, glancing around the living room, where the conversation had begun to quiet down. You want to sue me for accidentally falling in the pool? Seriously? Not really, I took a step forward. Mr. Lynn is here about something else, but I'd be happy to tell all your guests about it at the same time if I may. Violet turned pale. There was a flash of fear in her eyes. She didn't know what was happening, but she felt she was losing control of the situation. What are you talking about, Daddy? Nathan intervened, looking from me to the lawyer. What's wrong? Let's go into the living room, I suggested, and I'll explain everything, to everyone at once. Violet looked at me as if she had seen a ghost. Her perfect face was contorted with a mixture of bewilderment and irritation. Behind her, other guests began to appear in the living room doorway, attracted by the unusual noise. "Frank?" came the surprised voice of Gregory Prescott, Violet's father. "Are you back?" "And not alone," added one of the guests, noticing Thomas Lynn. "Sorry. What's going on, Nathan?" Violet turned to her husband, ignoring me. "Why is your father here again? And who is this man?" I felt a surge of confidence. The initiative was in my hands now. "Perhaps we should go into the living room," I suggested calmly. "What I have to say concerns everyone here." "This is my house," Violet said, arms crossed over her chest. "And I decide who goes where. You've already ruined our party once." "Violet," Nathan put his hand on her shoulder, "let's just listen to what they have to say. It might be important." His voice sounded uncertain, but there was determination in it. Violet pressed her lips together in frustration, but stepped back, allowing us into the living room. As we entered the large room, I looked around at the people gathered. Most of the guests were still here. Apparently, the party was in full swing. The conversations died down as Thomas Lynn and I entered. All eyes were on us. "Good evening," I nodded to those present. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Frank Holbrook. I'm Nathan's father. And this is Mr. Thomas Lynn, my attorney." "Lawyer?" Gregory Prescott asked, rising from the couch. "What do you need a lawyer for, Frank? Are you going to sue someone?" There was mockery in his voice, but also a note of concern. Perhaps he feared a lawsuit for the pool incident. "No, Mr. Prescott," I shook my head. "Mr. Lynn is here on another matter. He's representing my interests in an inheritance case." "Inheritance?" Violet laughed nervously. "What inheritance?" Thomas Lynn stepped forward and opened his briefcase. "If I may," he pulled out several documents. "I represent Mr. Francis Holbrook in the estate of his late brother, Howard Holbrook. According to the will, Francis Holbrook is the sole heir to the entire estate of Howard Holbrook." There was silence in the room. I watched as Nathan slowly lowered himself into the nearest chair, keeping his eyes on me. "Howard Holbrook," he repeated. "Your brother? The one you hardly ever talked about?" "Yes," I nodded. "My younger brother. We haven't spoken in over 20 years. But as it turns out, he appointed me his heir." "And what did you inherit?" one of the guests asked. "An old van and a vinyl record collection?" A nervous chuckle ran through the room. I noticed Violet and her parents exchange condescending glances. "Not exactly," I replied calmly. "Mr. Lynn, would you be so kind as to state the total value of the inheritance?" The lawyer nodded and read from the document. "The total estimated value of the property left by Howard Holbrook is $3,120,000, including real estate, bank accounts, and investment portfolio." The silence that came after these words was absolute. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath at the same time. I saw Violet's eyes widen, her father's face pale, and Nathan's grip on the armrests of his chair. "3 million?" Gregory Prescott finally squeezed out. "Are you kidding?" "I never joke about money, Mr. Prescott," Thomas Lynn replied seriously. "I have all the supporting documents. Mr. Holbrook inherited a house in Oak Ridge worth $1,400,000, bank accounts worth about $800,000, and an investment portfolio worth about $900,000. But, how?" Violet seemed lost. "When did this happen?" "My brother passed away 3 months ago." I watched their reactions with a kind of grim satisfaction. "Mr. Lynn found me just this week. I found out about the inheritance the day before your Thanksgiving invitation." "And you didn't say anything?" Nathan looked at me in disbelief. "Why would he?" I shrugged. "I wanted to see how you felt about me when you thought I was a beggar. I wanted to see if there was room in your family for an ordinary old man living on a pension. And I got an answer." I turned to Violet. "A very clear answer." Violet opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. Her face turned crimson. "Did you put on this show on purpose?" she finally squeezed out. "Come with a lawyer to humiliate us in front of our guests?" "Humiliate you?" I raised my eyebrows. "No, Violet, I came to get justice. You publicly humiliated me, pushed me into the pool, mocked me, called me a beggar. Your guests laughed at me. My own son didn't stand up for me." I turned to Nathan, who sat with his head down. "And now it turns out that the beggar you so despised is richer than everyone in this room. Ironic, isn't it?" "Frank, let's not get heated." Gregory Prescott tried to control the situation. There's been a misunderstanding. Violet didn't mean to offend you. She didn't? I looked him straight in the eye. Beggar, this holiday is not for you. Is that a misunderstanding? Did I fall in the pool myself? Dad, Nathan stood up and walked over to me. I understand that you're upset, and you have a right to be angry, but maybe we should talk about this in the privacy of the family. Are you afraid your rich friends will see what kind of family you really have? I shook my head. It's too late, Nathan. They've already seen everything. They've seen you kick your own father out, soaking wet, on a cold November evening. Nathan turned even paler. Violet stepped forward, trying to save the situation. Look, Frank, I may have overreacted, but you weren't very nice either. Let's forget this unpleasant incident and start over. After all, we are a family. Family? I grinned unhappily. Today you made it very clear that I'm not part of your family, that I'm just a burden to you, an old beggar you need to get rid of at the first opportunity. That's not true, she shook her head, but there was no sincerity in her eyes. I just overreacted. You weren't overreacting, Violet, I countered. You were being honest. For the first time in years, you said what you really thought. I turned to Thomas Lynn. Mr. Lynn, please tell me about the house I inherited. The lawyer nodded and pulled out another document. Mr. Holbrook inherited the mansion at 23 Pine Street, Oak Ridge. The house was built in 1,984, 380 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, swimming pool, garden. 23 Pine Street? One of the guests asked. That's just a few blocks from here. It's a great neighborhood. Yes, I nodded. Ironic, isn't it? My brother lived practically next door to my son, and probably neither of them knew about it. I can't believe it, Nathan muttered. Why didn't you ever tell me about your brother? We had a complicated history, I sighed. But this isn't about the past. It's about the future. I looked around the room. The guests looked stunned. Some of them averted their eyes in embarrassment, unsure how to react to this unexpected turn of events. I'm moving into Howard's house, I announced. Starting Monday, I'm starting a new life. The life I deserve after decades of hard work. That's wonderful, Dad. Nathan tried to smile. We can help you move. You don't have to, I shook my head. I don't have that much stuff. Besides, I'm planning on updating my closet. I might even buy a new car. Mr. Lynn had already recommended a good financial advisor to help me with my money. I noticed Violet and her parents exchange quick glances. Were they already figuring out how to access my newfound wealth? Frank, Gregory Prescott began, smiling strainedly, let me congratulate you on your good fortune. Perhaps we should celebrate. A family dinner next week? Thank you for the offer. I smiled without a shadow of warmth. But I'm afraid I'll be too busy. Setting up the new house, meetings with financiers, lawyers. Managing a fortune of $3 million takes time. Of course, Gregory nodded. But still, we'd like to, a closer family connection. Closer family ties? I raised my eyebrows. I wondered why those ties hadn't bothered you for the last 5 years, while I'd been living in a shabby apartment on the outskirts of town. Gregory coughed embarrassedly, unable to find an answer. Dad, Nathan took a step toward me. I realize we made a mistake. I made a mistake, but we can make it right. Now that you're going to live close by, now that I'm rich, I finished for him. Now all of a sudden it's important to maintain a relationship? No, that's not why. He shook his head, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. Nathan, I put my hand on his shoulder. I've always loved you, and I always will. You're my only son. But today you showed me what I really mean to you, and I'm not sure I can forget that. I turned to Violet, who was watching us in silence. You know, Violet, I was planning on helping your family, to pay for Liam and Penelope's education at the private schools you've always dreamed of. Maybe even get you a new house, bigger than this one, with the tennis court that Nathan wants. But after today, I shook my head. I changed my mind. Violet's face twisted with a mixture of horror and despair. You can't do this, she said. It's petty. Petty? I laughed. What do you call pushing a man into an icy pool and kicking him out of his house? Noble? The guests began to look at each other, many of them clearly uncomfortable with the family drama. "I think we should go," one of them said, rising. "Thank you for tonight, Nathan." Violet. The others began to get up after him. The atmosphere of the party was hopelessly spoiled. "Wait," Violet tried to stop them. "The evening is not over yet. We were going to—" But no one listened. The guests politely but firmly said their goodbyes and headed out, casting curious glances at me. "See what you've done," Violet hissed as the last of the guests left the room. "You ruined our party on purpose. You embarrassed us in front of our friends." "No, Violet," I said calmly. "You ruined it when you thought you could humiliate a man just because he was poor. When you thought that money determined a man's worth. I never said that, but I thought it, and I acted accordingly." Nathan stood between us, confused and depressed. "Dad," he said at last, "I don't know what to say." "Yeah, you don't have to say anything, son." I patted him on the shoulder. "Just think about what happened today, the choices you made, and the choices you'll make in the future." I turned to Thomas Lynn, who had been standing silently on the sidelines all this time. "Mr. Lynn, I think we're done here. We're good to go." The lawyer nodded and began to gather his papers. "Wait," Gregory Prescott stepped forward. "Frank, let's take our time. Perhaps we should sit down and have a quiet discussion." "It's too late, Mr. Prescott," I shook my head. "Too late for discussion. I've had all day to see your family's true attitude toward me, and I have seen it." I headed for the exit. Thomas Lynn followed me. At the door, I turned around one last time. "By the way, Nathan, tell Liam that his grandfather is still willing to teach him how to build birdhouses. A child is not to blame for the actions of adults." With these words, I left the house. The night air was fresh and cool, but this time I didn't feel cold. There was a fire burning inside me, not of rage or revenge, but of a strange, bitter satisfaction. "Are you all right, Mr. Holbrook?" Thomas Lynn asked as we got into the car. "Yes," I nodded. "For the first time in a long time, I'm really all right." We drove away from Nathan's house and I didn't look back. Through the windshield, I could see the starry sky and the sparse snowflakes beginning to swirl in the headlights. A new chapter of my life was beginning. A chapter in which I was no longer a helpless old beggar, dependent on the mercy of others. I could now determine my own destiny. "Would you mind driving down Pine Street?" I asked the lawyer. "I want to see my new home." "Sure," Thomas Lynn nodded, turning onto the right street. Soon we stopped in front of a beautiful two-story colonial-style mansion. It was dark, but even in the darkness of the night, it was solid and elegant. "The house is yours," Thomas Lynn said. "We can go inside if you want." "I have the keys." "No," I shook my head. "Not today. Today it's enough just to know that it exists, that it's real." Lynn nodded understandingly and pulled away. We drove through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, and I thought about the quirks of life. In the morning I was nothing, a lonely old man with an empty wallet and a ghostly future. Now I was a millionaire, the owner of a mansion in a prestigious neighborhood, a man on whom the fate of others depended. And although I felt bitter about my son's betrayal, there was hope in my soul. Hope that now that the masks were off, perhaps we could build a new, more honest relationship, without falsehood and pretense, without condescension and contempt. I didn't know if Nathan would forgive me for exposing myself today. I didn't know if he'd have the strength to admit his mistake. But one thing I did know was that my life had changed forever, and it belonged to me now. March was surprisingly warm. I sat on the terrace of my house enjoying my morning coffee and watching the gardener trim the hedges. In the past 4 months, my life had changed beyond recognition, as if someone had turned the page and started writing a whole new story. The house on Pine Street became my real home. At first, I felt like a stranger here, like an uninvited guest in someone else's life. The rooms filled with Howard's things held the imprint of his personality. But gradually, I began to change things, adding things of my own, removing things that seemed alien. I kept a few things that reminded me of my brother, his collection of antique clocks, a few paintings he'd collected over the years. Everything else I either sold or gave to charity. Thomas Lynn helped me with the legal formalities, and the financial advisor he recommended, Eleanor Shepard, taught me how to manage my unexpected wealth. A middle-aged woman with a sharp mind and a practical approach to money, she quickly explained to me the basics of investing, asset allocation, and expense planning. Mr. Holbrook, she said at our first meeting, 3 million is a significant sum, but not infinite. If managed properly, it will provide you with a comfortable life for the rest of your life. But reckless spending can quickly deplete even such a fortune. I heeded her advice. I did not buy luxury cars or expensive jewelry, limiting myself to a practical middle-class sedan and a few sets of quality clothes. Eleanor and I placed the bulk of our inheritance in conservative investment instruments that provide a stable income without excessive risk. The most unexpected discovery for me was how quickly people's attitudes change when they learn about your wealth. Neighbors who would never have paid attention to me before now greeted me with friendly greetings, invitations to barbecues and social events. I accepted these invitations selectively, not wanting to become the center of the neighborhood's social life. But among the new acquaintances were some sincere ones. For example, Oliver Brooks, a 72-year-old retired history professor who lived 2 houses down from me. We met while I was walking around the neighborhood exploring my new property. Oliver was working in the garden, and when he saw me, he suggested we come in for a cup of tea. We got to talking, and it turned out that we had a lot in common: a love of old movies, an interest in architectural history, and a skeptical attitude to modern technology. Since then, we have seen each other regularly, sometimes playing chess, sometimes just talking about life. Another pleasant acquaintance was Dorothy Hammond, a 65-year-old widow who ran the local library. She had organized a book club in the neighborhood, and Oliver invited me to join. Dorothy turned out to be an intelligent, educated woman with a subtle sense of humor. Gradually, our communication went beyond the book club. We went to the theater together, to exhibitions, sometimes just dined in cozy restaurants in Hutchinson. "You know, Frank," she said at one of these lunches, "this new life suits you very well. It's like you've gotten younger in the last few months." I smiled, thinking that it wasn't so much the money as the freedom I'd gained. Freedom from worrying about the bills, from the humiliating savings on everything, from having to put up with neglect for a crumb of attention from my own son. I tried not to think about Nathan, but it was impossible. Information about him and his family was still leaking out to me. Hutchinson wasn't a big town, and Oak Ridge was a small world where everyone knew about each other. I'd learned from Oliver, who was friends with a lot of the old-timers in the neighborhood, that Nathan was having trouble at work. The insurance company where he was a middle manager was reorganizing, and there were rumors of impending layoffs. Dorothy, whose niece worked at the same spa as Violet, had other news. My sister-in-law was much less arrogant, less likely to show off her expensive purchases, and had even canceled the traditional spring party she hosted every year. "They're trying to sell the second car," Dorothy said one day as we walked through the park. "And Violet doesn't take the kids to that expensive private school anymore. She's moved them to the regular neighborhood school." I nodded, not really interested, though I had mixed feelings inside. On the one hand, a petty part of me was glad that life had taught them a lesson. On the other, I worried about the grandchildren, who were in no way to blame. In early March, going through the mail, I found an envelope with Nathan's handwriting on it. It was the first direct message from him in months. After that memorable Thanksgiving, my son had tried to contact me by phone several times, but I didn't answer. Then there were messages on my answering machine that I erased without listening to. By Christmas, a card arrived with duty greetings signed by the whole family, including the kids. I'd sent gifts to the grandchildren, a construction set for Liam and a doll for Penelope. But I'd limited myself to a short, uncluttered note. And now the letter. I twirled the envelope in my hands, wondering if I should open it. What could Nathan be writing to me? Another apology? Or more likely, a request for financial help? They had to know about my awareness of their problems. Hutchinson was too small for secrets. I put the letter on the table, deciding not to open it, at least not right now. Perhaps later, when the emotions had settled down completely, or maybe never. I had a new life, new friends, new interests. Why rehash the past? Instead, I picked up another envelope from the table, from the travel agency. Inside was information about a Mediterranean cruise I'd booked for the end of April. A 2-week trip that Evelyn and I had dreamed of all our lives but never realized. Rome, Athens, Istanbul, the Greek islands, all the places she wanted to see while studying guidebooks and clipping pictures out of magazines. "We'll definitely go someday," she said. laying out the clippings on the kitchen table. When Nathan finishes college and gets back on his feet, when we pay off the mortgage, when we expand the business. But the someday never came. First, there were urgent matters, then the mortgage and her son's schooling, then the economic crisis that hit the construction business, and then her illness, sudden and merciless. All her savings were spent on treatment, but even the most expensive drugs and the best doctors could not save her. Now, 5 years later, I'm finally going on that journey, alone, but with the feeling that Evelyn would be by my side, seeing all those places through my eyes. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my reverie. A delivery man stood on the doorstep with a large box. "Mr. Holbrook? Delivery for you." He handed me a clipboard to sign. I signed and took the box. Inside was a set of woodworking tools, a professional, top-quality set. I'd ordered it a week ago, determined to resume an old hobby. There was enough room in Howard's garage for a small workshop, and I'd already started setting it up. As I laid out the tools, I remembered how I'd taught Nathan the simplest of carpentry techniques. The way his small hands awkwardly held the hammer, the way he pouted his lips in concentration as he hammered in a nail. Once we had been close, bound not only by blood, but by common interests, common pursuits. What changed? When had my son turned into a man for whom the opinion of his wife's rich friends was more important than his own father? That evening, I met Oliver and Dorothy at a small jazz club downtown. We took a table in the corner, ordered wine, and prepared to listen to the local band, which, according to Oliver, was not too bad for the province. "Frank, you seem a little pensive tonight," Dorothy said when the musicians took a break. "Something wrong?" "I got a letter from my son," I replied, twirling my wine glass in my hands. "What's in it?" Oliver asked. "I don't know. I didn't open it." My friends looked at me, but didn't say anything. They knew the history of my relationship with Nathan and Violet, knew about Thanksgiving. They didn't judge me for my decision to distance myself from my toxic family, but I sensed they didn't quite understand my intransigence. "I think you should read it," Dorothy said softly. "You don't have to answer, but at least see what he has to say." "I'm afraid I know what he's trying to say," I sipped my wine. "That they need money, that Violet is very sorry for her behavior, that they want a fresh start." "And what's wrong with that?" Oliver asked. "Maybe they've actually realized their mistakes." "Realized?" I grinned skeptically. "Or maybe they just realized that it was to their advantage to maintain a relationship with a rich relative, especially now that they're in financial trouble." "Frank," Dorothy put her hand on mine, "I understand your resentment. What happened on Thanksgiving was awful, but Nathan is still your son, your blood. Maybe you should give him a chance." I shook my head. "Dorothy, this isn't about resentment. It's about self-respect. All my life, I've worked hard to provide for my family. When Evelyn got sick, I sold our house to pay for her treatment. I supported Nathan in every way I could. And how did he repay me? He let his wife abuse me, humiliate me, and then kicked me out of the house soaking wet on a cold November night. People make mistakes," Oliver said quietly. "We all do stupid things that we regret." "Yes," I agreed. "But there are some things that can't be justified by a moment of weakness. There are choices that show the true essence of a person." The musicians returned to the stage, and the conversation was interrupted. I listened to the soft sounds of the saxophone, thinking about my friend's words. Maybe they are right. Maybe I should at least read the letter. The next morning, finishing my coffee on the terrace, I saw again the envelope left on the table yesterday. After hesitating for a second, I picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside were several sheets of paper, written in Nathan's familiar handwriting. I began to read. "Dear Dad, I don't know if you'll read this letter or throw it away right away, but I have to try. It's been 4 months since that horrible Thanksgiving, and every day I think about what happened, about my behavior, about Violet's words. I know that 'I'm sorry' isn't enough. I betrayed you, Dad. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I let Violet and her family treat you disrespectfully. I was a coward, and I have no excuse. I guess you've heard we're going through some tough times. The company's downsizing, and I was laid off last month. I'm trying to find a new job, but it's not easy at my age. Violet got her hours cut at the spa, too. We sold our second car, moved the kids to a regular school, gave up our country club membership, but that's not why I'm writing. Not because of money, although I won't lie. We're having a hard time right now. I'm writing because I've realized one simple truth. There is nothing more important than family. A real family based on love and respect, not money and status. Dad, I want to apologize. Not for that one night, but for all the years I've let social status and opinion come between us. When I was ashamed of your simplicity and honesty, when I tried to be part of Violet's world by denying my roots, and something else. Liam asks about you all the time. He remembers you promising to teach him how to build birdhouses. Penelope also remembers the grandfather who gave her a doll for Christmas. The kids don't understand why we don't see you anymore. I know it's probably too late to fix what I've ruined, but if you're willing to give us another chance, I'd really appreciate it. We could start small. Maybe you'd be willing to meet your grandchildren. They miss you. One more thing, Dad. If it's possible, I'd like to ask for some help. Not with money. I'll get a job. We'll manage. I need your advice, your wisdom. I am confused, and only now I realize how important it is to have a person who loves you unconditionally, despite all your mistakes. Love, your son Nathan. I folded the letter and stared at the horizon for a long time. My mind raced with thoughts. Should I believe Nathan's words? Did he really realize his mistakes? Or was this just a desperate attempt to get financial help in a time of need? And even if he was sincere, would it be enough to forget the humiliation I had suffered? I didn't know the answer. Maybe Dorothy and Oliver were right, and it was worth giving my son another chance. For the sake of the grandchildren, if not for his own sake. But was I willing to open up again, risking another disappointment? Putting the letter back in the envelope, I tucked it away in my desk drawer. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't answer it. I'm not ready yet. Maybe after the trip, when the emotions have finally settled, I can make a decision. I pulled out my Rome travel guide and started reading about the historical sites I planned to visit. Life went on, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free to make my own decisions, to follow my own desires without constantly looking at the opinions of others. Ahead was the journey that Evelyn and I had dreamed of. Ahead was the life I deserved, a life without toxic relationships, without humiliation, without having to endure disrespect for a crumb of attention. And Nathan, well, if he's truly changed, if his remorse is genuine, maybe in time we'll find our way back to each other. But it will be a new relationship based on mutual respect, not obligation or financial dependence. I deserve better, and I intended to get it.